Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. One of the reasons why money is so hard to talk about today is because we tend to be aiming one message at three very different audiences. You know, there's lots of talking heads. I guess I would include myself in that list, people who are sharing ideas about money. And in a lot of cases, they're saying the same thing over and over again. They're sharing these concepts, but they're talking to very different people. And a lot of times the way you apply those concepts is different depending on the situation that you're in. And so one of the frustrations that I hear from people all the time is that they've heard from these gurus about money and they don't know how to apply it to their life because it seems like it's for people who are in a different circumstance than they are. And I think that's real. I think that complicates things. We say these big, broad brushed concepts. We say this about debt, or we say that about investing and savings. We're talking in these big ideas, but the applications are nuanced. The situation that people are in varies, and we need to recognize that when we address these issues. And so one of the ways we do that at Good Sense is we think in terms of three different categories, and maybe even that isn't nuanced enough. But we at least want to get to a place where we're addressing the issues that people in these three different categories face. You know, the first category that we talk about are people who are in trouble, and they know it. They don't need to be mocked or shamed or belittled. They don't need to be beaten up. They have plenty of shame and self-loathing to go around. They already feel like they're failing, and they're scared. And they're really worried about how this all comes together. And so we don't need to pick at them or tell them that they're not doing it right. A lot of times these are harder problems to solve than just stop it. And so that first lane, as we think of them in terms of lanes, that first lane is really in a place where they just need to get to a place of stability. And we don't get to stability by being berated or mocked or belittled. We get to stability through hope, through understanding, through warmth. We want to treat people who are in that lane with dignity and respect because they deserve it. They're image bearers just like we are. And so I struggle when I hear the gurus telling people they're stupid. People don't find themselves in money situations that are difficult because they can't do arithmetic. These are really big issues, really difficult, deep-seated spiritual and emotional conditions. And people who are stuck in a lane one situation where they can't seem to get to a place of stability, they don't need to be told that they're stupid. They need to be told that there's hope and that there's a reason why this struggle is real. The situation that they're in is hard. And so we want to address lane one with kindness and warmth. And what we're looking for in that lane one situation is a path to stability, to some sense that I'm standing on my own 2 feet and it's going to work. And that is a different conversation than lanes 2 and 3. Lane 2, the way that we look at it, that audience of people, those are the individuals who are in trouble and they don't know it. So lane 1, those are people who are in trouble and they know it. Lane 2, they're still in trouble, but they think they're okay. And a lot of times that's because they're paying their bills. And if we define financial success as having cash flow that meets our current financial needs and nothing more, we're still headed to financial disaster. If all we're doing is keeping all of the plates spinning, but we're not accumulating a net worth, we're not building for future obedience, we're not preparing ourselves for what lies ahead, we're still in trouble, even if we feel like we're okay. And that's a different conversation. That lane needs clarity. We need to understand where these resources are going. What does it look like for us to manage these resources well and actually build for the future, to not overspend, to be more intentional? The third lane is one we're going to talk about in a different podcast, and that is a lane that actually isn't in trouble. And that's why this is such a complicated conversation. Either we aim the methods and the thoughts towards lane one, and that doesn't really apply to lanes 2 or 3, or we try to wake up lane 2 to pay attention to the trouble that they're in, and lane 3 says, that's not the problem I have, and lane 1 says, boy, I wish I had those problems, right? This is the challenge of trying to understand how to communicate about money. And lane 3, those individuals tend to be really good at their resources. They're making decent income, sometimes more than they need. They are accumulating really well. They're saving for the future, but they're starting to find their identity and their status and their significance in their wealth. They're seeing their wealth as the source of provision rather than seeing God as the source of everything. They start to take ownership and see these things as theirs rather than seeing all of their resources as God's. And so these are very different conversations, but they're all rooted in the same main concepts. We just got to apply those concepts differently. And so today, I want to peel back and get a little more detailed on lanes 1 and 2. How do we address these conversations? If you're in those lanes, this will be something that hopefully will be helpful for you. If you're leading people who are in those situations, my hope is that this helps you target your conversations in ways that are really going to help them apply these truths well. And so let's talk about lane 1, that person who's in trouble and they know it. The thing that individual tends to lack most is hope. They tend to look at the future and they're terrified. They are convinced it's never going to work. They also, a lot of times, blame themselves. Something's wrong with me. If I just spent less, if I just didn't have fun, if I just restricted myself to as little as possible and I never actually enjoyed anything, then I'd be able to make the math work. But a lot of times, that conversation needs to be starting from a place of, will the math even work? In lane 1, we need to get to a place of stability, and a lot of times we can't do it. No amount of cutting, enjoyment, or extra, because there's not that much extra there, is going to get to a place of stability, because we need more income. We need more cash flow. We need to drive a higher level of income in order to make any of this work. And so many times we tend to approach that lane 1 individual or family from a spending side of the equation. You just need to restrict yourself. You need to say no all the time. You need to never spend money. But that is not realistic in the world we live in. The bigger issue most times, and the reason why it's really hard for lane 1 to get to a place of stability, is because they aren't creating enough income in order to create a sustainable path to afford comfortably the life that they're leading. And so many times it is a function of driving a higher cash flow, understanding what life actually costs, and then building towards an income that will provide for that life. We berate these families on spending, but a lot of times they don't actually have a significant spending problem. They have a huge earning problem. We got to figure out how to help them move forward in their careers, help them find better opportunities for higher income. That is the fastest way, a lot of times, for these families to create stability. But if you're in a place of hopelessness, you don't see that as a path forward. You just assume that's not an option. If you are constantly feeling this sense of self-loathing and beating yourself up, then you're probably not going to have the confidence to move forward and try to stretch for the next opportunity. And so that's why kindness and warmth and hope is so important in the conversation for these families. They have plenty of shame. They already beat themselves up. We don't need to do that. We don't need to approach them in a way that makes them feel stupid. They're not stupid. They're brilliant, and they're capable, and they're amazing. And the more that we instill in them that truth, the more that they may start to catch a vision that leads to the stability they're craving. The other thing we need to do, though, is help understand what is the cost of the life you're trying to lead. Somewhere along the way, there's a disconnection. Either they are being subsidized in certain ways, and so they don't fully understand what life is actually costing them. Maybe they're getting a food subsidy on SNAP, or they're getting rent assistance, and it distorts their understanding of what it takes to make life work. Also, for these individuals, it's real that if they make more money, they lose some of those incentives and some of those subsidies, and the trade-off is too big. If they earn another $50 in income, they lose $200 in subsidy. That math never makes sense. And so it is a really difficult transition to get to stability when we don't fully understand what life is actually costing, and in some cases, earning more income makes that life cost more. It's a really confusing environment. And so we just need to handle that with grace and kindness. We need to make sure that we approach those families with patience. And we also instill in them the understanding that this is a long game. But in the meantime, many of the things that we might be saying to these other categories, these other lanes of people, they don't apply. In lane one, we are trying to just get to a place where we are stable. And so things like giving 10% or saving 10% or any of these other things that we might just generally throw out as good rules of thumb or even biblical mandates. We need to get to a place where bills are paid and we're not falling behind and we're not digging holes. And in the first part of that journey, it looks a lot like a triage in the emergency room. Where are we bleeding? What are the things we need to do? What are the big decisions we need to make? Maybe we need to change the place that we live. Maybe we need to change our career. Maybe we need to get a second or third job. Those are really hard hurdles to get over. And we're not doing them to get to some of these higher level goals. Our first priority is just get to a place where we're steady, where we can have the confidence that our bills are covered. And so that's why this lane is so generally frustrated with the financial guidance that they get. You know, when we just kind of broad brush say you should save 10%, you should give 10%, they're like, I'm just trying to buy groceries. I'm just trying to get to a place where my rent is covered. I'm trying to make sure my water doesn't get turned off or that my electricity doesn't get shut down. Those are real issues for these families, and we need to make sure we realize those are the right priorities. We do need to get them to a place of consistent stability before we even begin to talk about these other things. But what I find a lot of times when I'm interacting with families who are in these really difficult circumstances is they think they need to get to that 10% giving, 10% saving. They're talking about what it looks like to save for retirement, and they're dreaming about that stuff. They know that they need to do it. But if they put that cart before the horse, if they over prioritize those kinds of things, then they end up in situations where an emergency hits or their rent goes up or something changes and it blows everything up. And so if we've locked these things away for retirement while they still are in a place of just getting to stability, we're going to end up paying income tax plus a 10% penalty or taking out loans on 401ks or things that are ultimately going to impact their finances even more negatively than if we hadn't prioritized those things in the first place. And so we want to make sure we're doing this in the right order. And the first and most important priority is getting to a place where the income coming in is sufficient to buy the life that they need to just get to that place of steadiness. The second lane is a little more complex. The second lane, a lot of times, needs a little bit of tough love. A lot of times they are convinced that they're okay. They can afford this because they have the cash flow to buy it. And so they tend to be stacking a lot of the payments for things as they're accumulating stuff. They're doing it through financing those purchases, and they're building a cash flow need. Their floor of what they have to pay out lines up with their income. And if they get a raise, they spend it. If they get a raise, they take on another monthly payment. Lane 2 consistently is feeling like they have very little margin because they keep filling that margin. And they don't even remember a lot of times what those dollars were going towards. They don't even remember what they're paying, what they bought with the money when they financed it, because they're just sending money to so many different places. And it's really confusing. And when you ask individuals in lane 2, what are you spending on this or what are you spending on that? They don't know. They just know that at the end of the month, their bills are paid. That is not faithful stewardship. In this category where we have enough income, so we're not in that lane 1 where we've got to build a higher cash flow just to get to stability. We're now in a place where we have stability. We just don't have clarity. Lane 2, the conversation is really about understanding, where is it all going? What are you doing with it? And is that decision of where that money is going aligned with what faithful stewardship looks like for you and your family? Are you making decisions that are more emotional? Are you chasing a lifestyle to keep up with the Joneses and make sure that you feel significant and you feel successful? Are you doing these things just because you're trying to medicate emotions you're not facing? Those are the things we tend to find in lane 2. And the reason why lane 2 is so complicated is because they're convinced they're okay. They're convinced that as long as their bills are paid, they are being financially responsible. But there is an aspect of faithful stewardship that they're missing. First, they're missing the fact that they should know where these dollars are going and why. A faithful steward knows what happened with the owner's money. If the master has given us money to manage, we know what we did with his resources and why, and we can answer to that. If he were to ever ask, what did you do with these dollars? We need to be able to know exactly what we did. It's his, it's not ours. But secondly, I see these families a lot of times pushing down the priority of giving and replacing it with the priority of self-gratification. So we say, well, I'll give eventually when I have enough, but we're not saving and we're not building. So getting to a place of having enough is never going to happen, by the way. And so it's this thought that someday, somehow, miraculously, these resources will build to a place where I'll be convinced that I can give. And so generally in lane 2, we see undersaved and undergiving because they are overspending. That is a harder shift to make as a family because it takes a lot of conviction. And so this is not something where we need to guilt and shame these families, but we do need to call their attention to what they're doing. Is this reasonable? Is this enough? Draw the line. And the tool that we use in this lane 2 category is we call it our lifestyle cap. We say, this is enough. Decide now what is satisfying, what feels like contentment. Draw that line so that you can give and save the rest. We are not good in America at saying this far, no further. There's always more. We're always attracted to more. We always want more. And lane 2 has fallen prey to that. And that is the highest priority. To get to a place of clarity, we need to understand why we're spending money. Why are we spending right up to the edge of our means? Why are we never satisfied with enough? That's the problem to solve here. The clarity is about knowing where the money is going, but the more important clarity to discover is, why is it going there in the first place? Why are we spending this money? That's the work for lane 2. And what you're going to see in all of these lanes, and we'll get to lane 3 in a couple of podcasts, but what you're going to notice is that the underlying step is towards intentionality. In lane 1, that intentionality looks like making sure we are earning enough to afford the life we need to live. We are going to be intentional with choosing to move in the direction of more income, even if that means multiple jobs, to get us to a place where we are stable. In lane 2, we're going to see intentionality around our spending decisions. We have enough income, but we are being unintentional and emotional and reactional in the way that we are using God's resources, and we need to bring intentionality to that work. And so we want to foster intentionality across the board in all these lanes, but the way we're applying it is going to be different. And so I hope if you are leading conversations in the congregations you're a part of, if you're helping with financial ministry, if you're coaching people in finances, or if you find yourself in one of these lanes, I hope that understanding the conversation that needs to be had specific to these audiences helps you then turn to them and meet them where they are with more kindness, more patience, and ultimately calling them to the same truth that we are responsible to be faithful stewards with God's resources. But how we call each of these families is going to be unique to the situation that they face. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you.